What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Adam Armbrecht of Locked On Nets, as Kevin Durant has been on a warpath since returning to injury. And will we ever see Ben Simmons in a Nets jersey on the floor this season? But first, a quick message from our friends over at Built Bar, because look, when it comes to protein bars, you've got to pick the right one. And Built Bar is the #1 protein bar on the market. They've got so many incredible flavors to choose from: raspberry, strawberry, mint brownie, peanut butter, coconut brownie chunk, the #1, undisputed #1 flavor, at least in my opinion. So many great flavors. And the best part is every single bar, low cal, low sugar, high protein, high fiber, every bar covered in delicious chocolate. They're basically candy bars that are jam-packed with protein. And you can check them out. Just go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your very next order of the best tasting protein bars on the market. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. And joining us now is Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets. You can follow on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht. Now, Adam, Kevin Durant fresh off of a 50-piece against the New York Knicks. Let me just read some of these stats off to you. Most points by a Nets player versus the Knicks in franchise history. Second player with multiple 50-point games in a season in Nets NBA history. Third player with multiple 50-point games with 3 franchises in NBA history. This ridiculous stat line: 53 points, 19 of 37 shooting, 9 assists, 6 rebounds. Adam, it really does feel like to me that KD has been on a warpath since coming back. Does it kind of feel that way to you?
Oh, of course. I mean, listen, out of not only his apex predator mentality that he's always had in his career, but also out of necessity, right? The Brooklyn Nets cannot afford to lose games against teams they should beat, like the Hornets or like the Knicks in this game, but also against teams that maybe you don't think you can take on until you're full strength in the Philadelphia 76ers. Kevin Durant had a long layoff with his injury, came back onto the court and basically said, hey, we're locked in here. We have, at the time, 18 games to go. I need every single one of them, and you're about to see me remind the league that, yeah, I'm arguably the best player out there.
Is there any worry about him, potentially like overexerting himself, putting too much on his shoulders, right? This is a Nets team that is still not completely whole. Obviously, Kyrie Irving still only playing half the games. Didn't have Seth Curry in this one. Still trying to, figure out the pieces here. Whether or not we actually will see Ben Simmons on the floor this season, we'll get into that in a moment. But is there a worry that KD might be shouldering too much of a load here at the tail end of the season?
Yeah, and I mean, you go back to last year in the playoffs, and you had the injury to Kyrie, you had the injury to James Harden as he tried to work his way back, and ultimately what felt like it was just too much for Kevin Durant to have enough in the legs to get those final shots off and put them over the top against the Milwaukee Bucks. But the difference maybe this year is, as we just said, coming off the injury, so he has had rest time. And in a game like this, with no Seth Curry, as you mentioned, because he's the clear established third best scorer on this roster now behind Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, that will make these games, even without Kyrie or without Ben Simmons, a lot easier for Kevin Durant. You can worry about it, but what does worrying do in the end? Not a bit of good, because you're going to, if you need the performances, you're going to have to ask Kevin Durant to give them to you. You would have liked if they could have put the Knicks away a little bit sooner, but you'll take the victory nonetheless.
Is there any major concern there with Seth Curry, or is it just kind of a day-to-day thing with the ankle?
Came out of nowhere. Yeah, it just seemed like a little bit of a tweak on the ankle, and probably out of more precaution, which is a delicate balance for the Nets as they need to win these games. But I think you'd rather give him the one night off here against a lesser opponent in the Knicks and make sure you can have him for all these other games at home that you may not have Kyrie Irving available for.
Speaking about Seth Curry kind of, taking upon that mantle of being the third option now when Kyrie is playing behind, Kevin Durant and Kyrie, obviously. But what has his impact been like for this Nets team, stepping into the lineup, the rotation, as well as Andre Drummond, the two pieces, being a part of the James Harden trade that we've actually seen play for the Nets so far?
Yeah, it's interesting because the first benefit is, well, Seth Curry and Drummond already have familiarity. So putting those two out on the floor together, you at least know you'll have continuity there. And we've seen that play itself out, especially when Drummond's worked himself into the lane. But specifically on Seth Curry, you got to remember, 14 games into the season, the Nets lose Joe Harris. Then there's this up and down. Will he come back? Second surgery. He's been shut down for the year now. So the first piece was a perimeter shooter, because the Nets have been overtaxing Patty Mills. They pick up Dragic in the buyout market. Seth Curry in this group now becomes a guy who can score at all 3 levels, worked his butt off in his career to be at that point, but is also a facilitator. He can work off the dribble. Like, he is all of the things that the Nets didn't have a lot of behind Kyrie Irving and behind Kevin Durant. The fact that he's been able to do it effective, foster that relationship with the two stars, and then also really lean into the benefits of a Bruce Brown and a Drummond. Like, he has been capable of knowing when and how to make the smart basketball play, and you haven't seen him overextend himself on the perimeter shooting opportunities, something that Patty Mills, playing out of character, had started to do more and more of this season. Seth Curry came over here and stepped right into the perfect absence of role and the perfect role for his skill set.
And I know that there was maybe some cautious optimism when the trade was first announced that James Harden would be, leaving Brooklyn, and then looking at the return package, that there was some cautious optimism that the pieces coming back from Philadelphia were more, complementary to that of a duo of KD and Kyrie Irving. And is that kind of still where the optimism lies, is that those two guys have more than enough scoring power, talent to carry this team, and now they've got the better fitting pieces around them to find some success?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no denying having Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden fully invested. That's what you want. That's the first version of this team the Brooklyn Nets wanted. But on the back end of this trade, what you do now see is you get, I mentioned, Patty Mills back into his more comfortable role coming off the bench. Seth Curry is a capable scorer. Goran Dragic gets brought in on the buyout market. He can take on some of the point guard duties and keep the ball out of Kyrie or Kevin Durant's hands for possessions. This Nets team is offensive driven still. Now it becomes more about, especially like you saw against the 76ers in that previous matchup, the spacing and waves of perimeter shooting that they can surround these two stars with makes it very hard to think that over a 7-game series, you're going to be able to outrun the Brooklyn Nets. They've lost a superstar, but they still have all these complementary pieces. And I'll even throw in the extra bonus. Since the trade, essentially, Bruce Brown has reemerged as the player that he was last year for the Nets, playing with a high level of confidence, even knocking down some perimeter shots. His value is elevated now, too. So you have seen a little bit of everyone, I think, getting a surge of confidence once all of this confusion and speculation finally died down and the trade was officially made.
What we haven't seen yet, though, is Ben Simmons. And at this point, Adam, do you believe we're going to see Ben Simmons, on the floor this season? Where do you think that situation is headed?
Yeah, we talked about it on the podcast, and Doug had said anyone who thought that Ben Simmons was going to get back out on the court and be ready and available for the 76ers game, it was probably a fool's errand, not just from a health standpoint, a physical ramp-up standpoint. We know he's dealing with a little bit of a back tweak. We know the mental health side of it. You can speculate however you want about any of these things and their legitimacy, but we didn't think you would see him before that. We thought today might be a game against the Knicks. I do think you're going to see him before the end of the year. The question just becomes, is it going to be with 10 games? Is it going to be with 5 games? I think he will get out there on the floor, but there has been a narrative that this is as much a showcase for him for this year as it is for going forward in the big picture with the Brooklyn Nets. I push back on that. The Nets want him out there. They'll live with whatever the results are in the short term, but Ben Simmons is a part of this team's future. It's just a matter of if he can get on the court this year ahead of the playoffs, get a little bit of continuity with Kevin Durant and with Kyrie Irving, and then showcase how effective he can be, even just on the defensive end for this team in the playoffs.
Adam, before I let you go here, just looking at the seeding right now, the Philadelphia 76ers are currently in 3rd place. You've got the Brooklyn Nets at 8th, sitting in the play-in tournament range. There's a very realistic possibility here that we could be headed for a 76ers Nets first round matchup. How tantalizing would that be to watch these two teams go at each other, especially after that brief preview that we had with the Nets, firmly dismantling the 76ers in their matchup this past Thursday?
Yeah, listen, it was everything you wanted from Brooklyn Nets perspective. A tight game down to the wire would have been a thriller, but Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving talked about it after the game. They knew that the Philly fan base, that they were going to come after Ben Simmons. You come after one of us, you come after us all. We want to make a statement, take the crowd out of it. You're going to have, if Ben Simmons gets on the floor, a Ben Simmons, James Harden defensive matchup. You're going to have Kevin Durant getting into the face of Joel Embiid, size be damned, and saying, I'm not backing down from you. I am the best player in the game, right? So there's going to be a lot of chippiness to this. Even Andre Drummond wanted to make some statements. He got physical with Embiid as well. Seth Curry, 24-point performance in that game. Like, there is no shortage of narratives and storylines that would play out over a 7-game series between those two teams. I think it would be one of the best things, not just for the Brooklyn Nets fan base, the 76ers fan base, but for the NBA, because you're ratcheting up based on everything the Nets have had to deal with. You get to ratchet up the playoff picture and say, no, round one can actually be as epic as anything you're going to see in these playoffs.
To me, at least, the most possible exciting first-round matchup across the board in the NBA. Hopefully, we'll see that pan out. It would be a ton of fun to take part in, and you're going to have us covered for all of that and more Nets news and info over at Locked On Nets. Adam, appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks as always.